This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. What's up, Wisecrack? Jared here to talk about one of the dumber conspiracy theories we've ever come across. The idea that 5G has caused the global pandemic known as COVID-19. And while these desperate times are full of snake oil salesmen, this one perhaps takes the cake. Meet Thomas Cowan. Thomas's video claiming that 5G causes COVID-19 had over 500,000 views on YouTube before being taken down. And that idea, with the help of celebrities like Woody Harrelson, is gaining traction. In the UK, people have torched several 5G towers for its alleged role in the pandemic.
The UK has reported around 50 fires targeting towers and other 5G equipment.
Of course, this is all bonkers, and we'll get to that. But we nonetheless wanted to dive deep into what exactly these people are saying and why. Because the line between science and non-science is not as easy to discern as one might think. So how can we tell the difference? Let's find out. Welcome to this Wisecrack Edition on the anatomy of pseudoscience. But before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network, a tool that can be used to connect to the internet securely. When you connect to the internet with a VPN, your IP address and other valuable data are encrypted, protecting you against hackers. This means you can safely use your banking info without fear of a leaked PIN. Surfshark goes above and beyond your typical VPN by offering extra services like Kill Switch, which disables your internet connection when your VPN stops working so you're always protected. They also offer an ad and cookie blocker so that sites can't collect data or target you with ads. The best part about Surfshark is that you only need one subscription to connect to an unlimited amount of devices. You can connect on your computer, phone, iPad, or even your gaming console. Protect yourself online and download Surfshark VPN today. Click the link in the description and use the promo code WISECRACK to get 85% off your subscription plus 3 months free. And now, back to the show. Let's get back to Thomas. His pitch is simple. When our cells get sick, they excrete toxins, and 5G is poisoning those cells, causing them to poop out, his words,
"It's the body is pooping out poisons. It's obviously not good to eat other people's poop."
Toxins that make us sick with a little thing called COVID-19. In his many YouTube videos, he makes a series of incredible claims. They include, viruses don't cause diseases, the Spanish flu that killed tens of millions was caused by the electrification of the earth and radio waves, because we're electrical beings, other major outbreaks in the last century were caused by said electrification. Also, he's an anti-vaxxer. Obviously, the most outlandish part about this is how technology has caused all these infectious diseases, especially given the many fun and exciting infectious diseases that were among the leading causes of death pre-electricity, like smallpox, bubonic plague, or the measles. To be fair, proving diseases existed before radio doesn't prove radios can't make us sick, but Cowan's entire worldview seems to be natural equals good, like when he talks about all the pure water we used to drink.
There was no toxic stuff dissolved in the water.
And conveniently forgets the thousands of years people would drop dead of drinking water teeming with pathogens from your upstream neighbor's shit. You might be asking, how do people fall for this? You might respond, they're stupid. But I think this excuse is lazy. Plenty of smart and thoughtful people fall for pseudoscientific nonsense, and you probably will at some point in your life do the same. Pseudoscience often looks like real science. Experts will be trotted out, MDs, PhDs from real universities. They'll even have evidence and studies. But one of the most interesting things about pseudoscience is the use and abuse of this evidence and the basic problem of context. So let's talk about context. There's one pretty illustrative example from Netflix's Goop series. In one episode, an energy healer insists that his 100% not scientifically backed energy healing process of waving his hands over your body really does work by using a rock-solid piece of evidence, the Double-Slit Experiment.
One foundational study is called the Double-Slit Experiment. Proved empirically without a shadow of a doubt that our consciousness actually shifts or alters in some way, shape, or form physical reality.
You might remember this experiment mentioned in high school or college physics, but the takeaway is this. Light can act like a particle or wave, but if observed, it will collapse into its particle state. That this proves our mind can affect the material world is, well, not completely bogus, but so vague that it could be construed to mean anything. Our consciousness affects physical reality all the time, as it instructs my palm to cover my face in complete disbelief that Netflix aired this show.
She threw up from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m.
But sadness aside, such a claim relies on a few things. 1. A misunderstanding of the context of the experiment. Light collapses into a single state because it has to interact with the measuring tool observing it, not because our consciousness willed it to be so. 2. A large interpretive leap that goes above and beyond the extremely limited hypothesis that the experiment is testing. Cue the science explaining text on screen and the use of the word implies. Let's just say you could will light to be a particle or wave by thinking it. Does an experiment that proves this mean you can make weird puppet gestures to cure people's ailments? No. The basic problem is this. Pseudoscience often preys on the fact that its victims are educated. For instance, anti-vaxxers tend to be more educated than their well-vaccinated peers. We all can't be quantum theory experts or immunologists, so instead they give us evidence that often conforms to our basic understanding of science. So when Energy Healy Man explains the energy that runs through our muscles, it seems to vaguely sound like our understanding of anatomy.
You have energy that's bound up in the muscles and ligaments and spine and fascia and organs when you're under stress.
Then they stretch the applicability of that evidence by making huge logical leaps based on the evidence they present.
Crystals vibrate at different levels depending on their composition and color, as do the cells in the human body.
The success of pseudoscience preys not on the fact that people are dumb, but that we are completely incapable of knowing every scientific principle that intersects with our lives. I have a headache, I take a Tylenol, but I personally have zero idea how the biochemistry involved makes it better. With that in mind, let's get into the profound lack of context implicit in the idea that it isn't viruses that cause COVID-19, but 5G. We'll have to start with the question, how do we know what viruses cause what illnesses? Before the 1800s, people had basically no idea what was making most people sick. Sure, they had some theories, but it wasn't until the 1700s and 1800s that a series of discoveries vastly expanded our knowledge of the microbial world that was killing us. You probably remember Louis Pasteur as the guy that discovered heating up milk would make sure your cow juice wouldn't murder you, but his experiments helped the formation of the germ theory of disease. Notably, Pasteur had a rival named Robert Koch, who was also looking into the tiny, murderous world around us. Koch's work in microbiology is the entire reason why we know when you've got, say, the flu instead of COVID. And it's Robert Koch who Cowan cites to support his claims that COVID-19 isn't caused by a virus. Koch and his peers were faced with a question. How exactly does a scientist determine, of all the millions of organisms in our body, which one is making us sick? Koch had 4 simple rules known as Koch's postulates. 1. We can suspect a specific microorganism of causing an illness if we can find that organism in all the cases of that illness. But that's not enough because there are many different microorganisms in all of our bodies, which brings us to 2. You have to be able to isolate this microorganism and grow it in a pure culture. Let's say you've got someone suffering from COVID-19. You can take a nasal sample, filter out the other organisms, and grow some disease juice in a petri dish. 3. The cultured microbe will cause disease in a healthy host. Now, modern scientists often don't want to intentionally make people sick with their ethics and all, so instead they might introduce their disease juice to some healthy lab cells, or sadly, a monkey, rat, or some other animal, and see if they develop COVID-19 symptoms. 4. You're able to watch as your newly infected organism produces enough virus or bacteria for you to once again isolate it in a petri dish, making a brand new batch of disease juice. And in line with making logical leaps from real science, Cowan uses Koch's postulates as a reason to explain why COVID and the flu are hoaxes. For one, he claims that in Boston during the Spanish flu, they sucked the snot out of people and injected it into healthy people, eliciting no symptoms. That would make it disqualified by Koch's 3rd postulate. Except, well, we looked at that paper and the author pretty much says, I'm pretty sure we're doing everything wrong. Ironically, the whole reason people found the virus that caused the flu was Koch's postulates. Unsure of what was causing everyone to get sick with the Spanish flu, some suspected a bacteria called Pfeiffer's bacillus, while others suspected a specific virus. Importantly, bacteria are much larger than viruses, so they can be filtered out with tiny little virus-sized holes. True to Koch's postulate, in 1918, 2 French researchers were able to infect monkeys and a human with their isolated bacteria-free virus juice who subsequently got sick, thus giving strong evidence that the flu was caused by the influenza virus instead of Pfeiffer's bacillus. Additionally, other researchers helped rule out Pfeiffer's bacillus because they found it in all kinds of people without the flu, thus violating Koch's first postulate. It's important to note how these findings come about because of a community of scientists and not a lone study or researcher. Koch's postulates were not only critical 100 years ago, they're critical today. When researchers in Korea wanted to figure out what we now call COVID-19, they isolated a virus that looked a lot like SARS and infected healthy lab cells to fulfill part of Koch's postulates. That virus they called SARS-CoV-2. Researchers have also claimed to successfully infect monkeys and rats. Koch's postulates are not perfect though, and even he realized this. For instance, some people contract infections but don't show symptoms, and while we might want to say, boom, Koch debunked, there's plenty of other reasons to believe that microorganisms are still infectious without affecting everyone who contracts them. Like when a certain Irish cook managed to give typhoid to a bunch of the families she cooked for despite being perfectly healthy, or how some viruses can go dormant in our bodies, like herpes, before becoming active again. Scientists often debate how to best tweak Koch's postulates. Modern techniques like sequencing the genome of a suspected virus and comparing it to genetically similar viruses, like comparing COVID-19 to SARS, can provide evidence for identifying the microbial causes of an illness not even dreamable in Koch's time. But people like Cowan, playing it fast and loose with the scientific principles they dish out, will say things like Koch's postulates assert that 100% of people with the virus or bacteria should have symptoms, an idea that not even Koch believed. And of course, there is little to no experimental evidence that suggests viruses are just cell poop, and I'm unaware of anyone blasting lab cells with 5G waves that was able to produce the novel coronavirus from nothing. Like our energy healer, Cowan points to real research to imply that he's correct. But here's our favorite part of the story. Cowan is a medical doctor. He went to medical school. He should have the medical context for why these claims are completely bonkers. But it's also worth noting, most doctors are not research scientists, and their training focuses on rote memorization, not critical thinking or modern research techniques. And this is at least part of the reason you can find plenty of people with medical degrees saying the dumbest things about vaccines or coronavirus. They think simply being armed with the facts in a vacuum will lead them to the right conclusion. Which brings us to the problem of evidence. We're never really taught to think critically about evidence and how it should shape our understanding of the world. To figure out why, let's consider Cowan's evidence. First, he claims that 5G was launched in Wuhan, China, where COVID originated. Aside from the fact that this is just wrong, as 5G services previously existed in parts of the US and South Korea, this is allegedly correlational evidence, as is a series of pandemics that coincided with radio and other technology. At this point in the video, countless shitlords have likely already commented, LOL, correlation doesn't equal causation. And that's true, but correlation is important evidence that we use all the time. And the fact that places which have no 5G are also experiencing COVID outbreaks is evidence that this specific correlation is bullshit. Let's turn back to Cowan's slam dunk on how the Boston researchers couldn't deliberately infect people with the flu, not even with their gross flu snot. This evidence is meant to cast doubt on the prevailing idea that viruses are infectious. If a virus isn't giving people the flu, then surely something else must be, like the radio. What should we make of all this evidence? One route is just to call it bad evidence. No, 5G existed elsewhere before Wuhan. No, correlation doesn't equal causation. But there's something else going on here that we've seen a lot in people like Cowan, energy healers, and flat earthers. A fetishization of the crucial experiment.
If we could simply get one of these ring laser gyroscopes, we would be able to prove once and for all that there is no rotation to the Earth.
The crucial experiment was an idea set forth by Francis Bacon, who many of you know as the scientific method guy. You've probably heard a story like this. People have some outdated or wrong idea, and someone has a eureka moment designing an experiment to settle the case once and for all. Think Newton with his prism proving his theory of light. Or if you're energy guy, the double-slit experiment is the crucial experiment that proves you can realign people's energy by snapping.
And I'm making sounds with my hands. I'm putting energy into the field around somebody's body.
And while science is full of these important experiments, the problem with crucial experiments is that they rarely, if ever, exist as we understand them. This all speaks to the basic problem in science known as underdetermination, which the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines as the simple idea that the evidence available to us at a given time may be insufficient to determine what beliefs we should hold in response to it. This idea originates from the work of Pierre Duhem. a French physicist who argues that when one performs an experiment and tests a hypothesis, there is never one single hypothesis being tested. When one wants to test the idea that the flu is infectious, one might cough on a healthy person to see if they get sick, but there is an innumerable amount of assumptions and hypotheses embedded in any simple test. For instance, that the flu virus travels via air, that it's always present in a sick person's lung or throat, that a sick person is always infectious, that viruses exist, and so on. When an experiment fails, Duhem argues, it's impossible to say where the failure lies. Let's unpack it within the context of our Boston flu experiment. Putting someone's snot into someone's body rests on all kinds of hypotheses and assumptions. Reading the paper has the author, as a good scientist, asking questions about what kind of assumptions he incorrectly made about the flu. Does transporting said mucus for 4 hours somehow harm the flu virus? Were the people they tried to infect already exposed without knowing it? Do people stop being contagious even while they're sick? Thus, the conclusion that the flu is not infectious was not even considered by the performer of the experiment. All it really shows was how little they knew about the flu and viral infections, which would hopefully encourage scientists to dig deeper and deeper. It's also important to remember that science happens when people build conclusions from evidence, and unfortunately, this is a prime way human bias and dumbassery can enter the scientific process. And a complete ignorance of how human bias easily enters the scientific process has led to some of science's worst mishaps. I want to stress this slam dunk flu evidence from Cowan because this kind of tactic isn't just a common refrain for anti-vaxxers, energy healers, or the 5G causes COVID people, but almost every talking head you've seen on television and YouTube. Seriously, just look at any video with "owns" in the title, and you'll likely find some pundit or straight up quack offering a handful of key studies that thoroughly debunk the other side. But the problem is, science doesn't work like this. Science is not an individual process where one scientist performs a crucial experiment and changes the game. It's done with other scientists. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch would have been relegated to the dustbin of history if their ideas about germs weren't built upon by countless experiments and theorization of their peers. Not only peers who replicated their experiments, but built upon their techniques as they went looking for microbes, developed vaccines, and looked for evidence that poked holes in their theories. Even the French researchers who isolated the flu virus would have been long forgotten if their evidence wasn't corroborated and built upon. An entire web of knowledge is built. As historian Naomi Oreskes writes, summarizing Pierre Duhem's work, experiments simply tell us if a theory is confirmed or weakened by the facts. Next time you see someone touting an experiment that seemingly upends everything we know about one thing or another, ask yourself, does it really? Many conspiracy theories have a smoking gun, like Andrew Wakefield's discredited study linking autism to the MMR vaccine, or Cowan's slam dunk of a study from 100 years ago. If pseudoscience is appealing because it latches onto scientific principles that we vaguely remember from high school, the full context of those principles is what often makes pseudoscience fall apart. It's the web of knowledge, not individual facts, studies, or tests that makes science robust. So when Cowan points to the very basic principles of virology to disprove the idea that COVID-19 is an infectious disease, it's only the context of those principles that can save us. And for scientists, Oreskes says, it's not just on them to tell the world what they know, but how they know it. There's the constant refrain and a lot of bad alarmism that we don't know the effects of this thing. And while plenty of corporations have put out products that accidentally killed a bunch of people, the answer is not to invent a cause out of thin 5G-laden air. Of course, Thomas Cowan's idea that an untested technology is dangerous to human health and should be stopped at all costs is also incredibly ironic, because his own medical license was put on probation after he suggested a patient with breast cancer take a drug that has never gone through any safety trials, without even suggesting to the patient it might be dangerous. He also did so without ever consulting the patient's medical records or performing an in-person examination. Whoops. Thanks again to all our patrons for supporting us. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.